Iran, 1953. The CIA mounted its first major covert operation to overthrow a foreign government. The target was the Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. He held power legitimately through his country's parliamentary process, and he was popular. Washington had once looked to him as the man to prevent a communist takeover. But that was before Mossadegh decided that the Iranian state, not British companies, ought to own and control the oil within Iran's own borders. When he nationalized the British-run oil fields, Washington saw red. The Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, and his brother Alan, director of the CIA, decided with Eisenhower's approval to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah of Iran. The mobs paid by the CIA and the police and soldiers bribed by the CIA drove Mossadegh from office.
The puppet makers. Wherever we look in this chaotic world, we see the U.S. trying to install a network of puppets who owe more to the U.S. than to the people of their own countries. In simplistic terms, the corporate media pushes the idea of good guys and bad guys, silly symbols that take us back to mythic cowboy movies. In fact, any given leader can be a good guy and a bad guy, depending on the time you're talking about. The late Saddam Hussein, now derided almost universally as a dictator, was an American ally just a brief time before, receiving a bounty of U.S. arms and, yes, weapons of mass destruction. As long as Saddam was using his weapons against Iran, all was well. Today, an Iraqi puppet sits on the national throne, a creation of U.S. power as surely as was the late Shah of Iran. Afghanistan presents an almost identical snapshot, a leader supported on a throne of U.S. bayonets, in a word, a puppet. Why is it the business of the U.S. to appoint leaders for other nations? What's right about that? What's democratic about that? We don't question it because it's so deep in our national and international experience. Why national? Well, while many folks know about the FBI's harassment of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., how many of us know that the government planned to replace him as a black leader with someone who was more malleable and less committed to civil rights? The FBI wanted to replace King with Samuel Pierce, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Reagan, someone who Reagan incidentally greeted as a guest to the White House, not recognizing him as a member of his own cabinet. The imperial instinct of placing puppets over other people didn't begin abroad. It didn't start when one crossed the border. It began in the U.S. in an attempt to control and channel a popular movement. That's because empires begin at home. In essence, they export the methods they use at home abroad. From death row, this is Mumia, Abu-Jamal. These commentaries are produced by Noel Hanrahan for Prison Radio.
Nearly everybody in Iran of any importance has had a brother or a mother or a sister or a son or a father tortured, jailed, deprived of property without due process. I mean, an absolutely buccaneering dictatorship in our name that we supported. SAVAK was created by the CIA.
SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, tortured and murdered thousands of his opponents. General Richard Secord and Albert Hakim, whom we met earlier, were among those who helped supply the Shah's insatiable appetite for the technology of control. But the weapons and flattery heaped by America on the Shah blinded us to the growing opposition of his own people. They rose up in 1979 against him. Death to the Shah, they shouted. Death to the American Satan.
Khomeini is a direct consequence, and the hostage crisis is a direct consequence, and the resurgence of the Shia is a direct consequence of the CIA's overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953.